Hey guys, tonight we are tiptoeing into the surprisingly dramatic and occasionally quite gloomy social life of the ancient Greek gods, specifically focusing on how one young goddess ended up taking what we might charitably call an extended and initially rather involuntary vacation. Picture this sun-drenched meadows carpeted with wildflowers, the gentle buzz of happy little ancient Greek bees, and a young goddess. Let's call her Persephone, blissfully unaware that her life is about to take a very sharp, subterranean left turn. This isn't your average gap year backpacking trip. We're talking a full-blown, hope you packed for eternal gloom kind of journey. Honestly, navigating the politics and surprise real estate acquisitions of the Greek gods. You probably won't survive this tale without wondering how anyone got anything done with all the divine drama. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. So, drop a comment below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start by getting to know our protagonist before her life takes that unexpected detour. You find her in a place of perpetual springtime, a meadow so vibrant with color it almost hums. This is Persephone, or as she's often called in her youth, Kor, which simply means the maiden. And a maiden she is in every sense of the word, young, innocent, and seemingly without a care in the vast, sunlit world. Her days are spent among the flowers, but which isn't surprising, as she's often considered the very essence of spring's new growth. The tender shoots, the unfurling petals. Imagine her, a graceful figure with a lightness in her step. Her hair perhaps the color of ripening wheat or dark like rich earth, crowned with a circlet of wildflowers she's just gathered. Her primary attribute, the ancient equivalent of her personal brand, was often simply flowers, depicted holding them, weaving them, or just being surrounded by a riotous bloom. Her main responsibility in the grand scheme of divine duties seems to have been ensuring the local daisy and narcissus population didn't get entirely out of hand. A tough gig, perhaps, but someone had to oversee the floral aesthetics of ancient Greece. She is the daughter of rather impressive parentage. As you might expect, her father is none other than Zeus, king of the gods, ruler of Olympus, wielder of thunderbolts, and a deity with a rather complicated family tree and an even more complicated romantic history. Her mother is Demeter, the powerful and deeply revered goddess of the harvest, agriculture, grain, and the earth's fertility. Demeter is the one who ensures the fields are bountiful, the crops ripen, and humanity doesn't starve. She's a serious, nurturing goddess, deeply connected to the cycles of life and growth on earth, and Persephone, her core, is her pride and joy, the embodiment of the life that springs forth when the earth is kind. The bond between Demeter and Persephone is incredibly close, a tender and protective maternal love. Demeter watches over her daughter with a fierce devotion, perhaps keeping her somewhat sheltered from the more boisterous and unpredictable aspects of Olympian society. You can imagine Demeter as a classic helicopter parent, Olympian style. If Persephone so much as stubbed her toe on a particularly stubborn crocus, Demeter was probably ready to call down a localized blight on a nearby olive grove just to make a point. Life for Persephone, therefore, is generally idyllic, peaceful, and largely uneventful. Her companions are often the Okeanides, gentle nymphs of the ocean, or other nature spirits, and together they while away the sunlit hours in meadows, gathering flowers, dancing, and singing, far from the plodding and power plays of Mount Olympus. She was the kind of goddess who probably thought the Underworld was just a trendy new, slightly edgy brunch spot that Zeus hadn't bothered to tell her about yet. Perhaps with a pomegranate-themed menu. Historians still argue whether Persephone's pre-abduction persona, as simply Kore or the Maiden, implies a lack of individual agency or a sort of divine blank slate, or if it instead represented an archetypal purity and potential that made her subsequent transformation and journey even more resonant and significant within Greek religious thought. Was she simply a passive nature spirit, or was her quiet, unassuming existence a necessary prelude to a much more complex destiny? It's one of those delightful academic head-scratchers that keeps classicists happily employed. For now, though, you see her as the epitome of youthful joy and the vibrant promise of spring. The world she knows is one of warmth, light, the scent of blossoms, the hum of bees, the gentle rustle of leaves. She is, in many ways, a personification of nature's beauty and effortless abundance before the toil of the harvest. There are no great burdens on her shoulders, no complex political games to play, no thunderbolts to manage. Her existence is one of simple, unadulterated, perhaps even slightly boring loveliness. This idyllic life, this connection to the earth's fertility through her mother Demeter, is not just a pretty mythological picture. The worship of Demeter and Persephone as a divine mother-daughter pair was absolutely central to one of the most important and enduring religious traditions in ancient Greece, the Eleusinian Mysteries. This mainstream historical fact points to the profound significance these two goddesses held for ordinary Greeks. These secret rites, held annually at Eleusis near Athens, promised initiates a deeper understanding of life, death, and rebirth, and the hope of a blessed afterlife, all tied into the story of Demeter's sorrow, Persephone's descent, and her eventual return. So our flower-picking maiden is already, even in her carefree youth, a figure of immense symbolic importance, though she herself may not fully grasp the path that lies before her. Right now, though, such weighty matters seem a world away. Your Persephone is simply enjoying the sunshine, perhaps weaving a garland of asphodel and narcissus. Her laughter is light and airy as a butterfly's wings. The world is a place of unending bloom, and her greatest concern is probably choosing which meadow to explore next, or whether the blue hyacinths are looking particularly fine today. Little does she know that the rich, dark earth beneath her flower-strewn playground holds another realm entirely, one ruled by a quiet, brooding deity who is about to take a very keen and very decisive interest in the maiden of the spring. Her casual, sun-drenched days are numbered, and a rather different kind of vacation is unknowingly being planned for her. So, while our dear Persephone is up on the surface world, blissfully weaving daisy chains, perhaps humming a little tune, and generally personifying a perfect, sun-dappled spring afternoon, as we just imagined, a very different kind of deity is ruling over a very different kind of domain. Deep, deep beneath the roots of those very flowers she so loves. This is Hades, and his kingdom is, shall we say, significantly less Instagrammable. In fact, if the Underworld had a travel brochure, it would probably major on phrases like peace and quiet guaranteed, excellent long-term stays, and surprisingly low tourist traffic. Not exactly a top vacation hotspot, unless your idea of a getaway involves a distinct lack of sunshine and an awful lot of very, very quiet neighbors. Hades, you see, is one of the big three Olympian brothers, when he and his more famous siblings, Zeus, king of the gods, Sky Dweller, and Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquake enthusiast, drew lots to divide up the cosmos after they'd overthrown their father Cronus and the other titans. Hades drew the short straw, or perhaps the gloomiest one. He became the ruler of the Underworld, the vast, shadowy realm of the dead. It's a pretty important gig. Make no mistake, everyone eventually becomes one of his subjects. He's also sometimes known as Pluto, which means the rich one. Not because he's hosting lavish parties, but because all the precious metals and hidden wealth of the earth technically fall under his domain. A nice perk, though probably not much use when your subjects are mostly incorporeal shades. His personality, as you might expect from someone whose daily view is endless fields of pale asphodel and misty rivers, tends towards the somber and stern. He's not typically portrayed as actively evil or malevolent in the way some later traditions might imagine a ruler of the dead. He's more of a reluctant, duty-bound administrator of a necessary, if profoundly depressing, cosmic department. He's unyielding, and he makes sure the rules of his kingdom, primarily, that once you're in, you don't get out, are strictly enforced. He rarely ventures up to the sunlit world of Olympus, preferring the quiet solitude of his own domain. You get the sense he's the introverted brother who got stuck with the least glamorous part of the family business and just kind of leaned into it. His kingdom, also often just called Hades, is a place of dim light and muted colors. Imagine vast cavernous spaces, rivers like the Styx which souls must cross, Acheron the river of woe, and Lethe the river of forgetfulness, winding their way through desolate plains. The asphodel meadows are where the ordinary shades of the dead wander aimlessly, like listless commuters on an eternal, gloomy Monday morning. There's a distinct lack of birdsong, a noticeable absence of laughter, and the air is probably cool and still, carrying perhaps the faint, dry scent of dust and something ancient and forgotten. His palace, though undoubtedly grand in its own way, reflects this overall aesthetic. Think imposing, dark stone, vast, echoing halls, and very little in the way of cheerful floral arrangements. And it's here, in this majestic but overwhelmingly solitary kingdom, that Hades finds himself feeling, well, a bit lonely. Being king of a realm where pretty much everyone is, by definition, a non-corporeal ghost probably doesn't make for sparkling dinner conversation. How was your day, dear Shade? Oh, more ethereal moaning, a bit of aimless wandering. Same old, same old. Gods and goddesses from Olympus rarely pop down for a visit. It's not exactly on the way to anywhere. And the ambiance is a bit of a downer. He has no queen, no consort to share his shadowy throne or the silent grandeur of his realm. He's got all this power, all this territory, but no one to, say, discuss the draftiness of the West Wing with, or to debate the merits of installing a slightly less depressing style of brazier. Scholars continue to debate the original characterization of Hades, whether he was always seen as this grim and reluctant ruler of the departed, or if earlier cults, before the Olympian myths fully crystallized, might have portrayed him in a more ambivalent or even chthonic fertility god role, perhaps linking him more directly to the Earth's hidden bounty and the cycles of life and death. It's a fascinating question how his image evolved into the rather solitary figure we generally know. The ancient Greeks, it's important to remember, and this is a mainstream historical fact, had a complex and rather nuanced view of the afterlife. The underworld wasn't uniformly a place of fire and brimstone punishment like the later Christian concept of hell. For most souls, it was simply a dim, neutral, and somewhat boring place of existence. There were, of course, special designated areas, Tartarus, a deep abyss for the truly wicked and those who had offended the gods, where they endured eternal punishments, and the Elysian Fields, or Elysium, a much more pleasant, paradise-like realm reserved for heroes and the exceptionally virtuous. Hades, in his gloomy palace, presided over all of it, ensuring every soul went to its allotted place. So, with all this endless, quiet responsibility, it's perhaps understandable that Hades might start to yearn for a bit of companionship, a queen to share his vast, echoing domain, and why Persephone, our carefree flower child from the sunny meadows above, well, the myths don't always give explicit, logical reasons for divine attractions, but you can speculate. Perhaps it was her radiant beauty, her youth, her vibrant association with life, flowers and spring, everything that was the absolute antithesis of his own existence and his kingdom. Maybe he thought bringing a little bit of that light, that life, into the gloom of the underworld would liven the place up. It's like an interior decorator deciding the local crypt really needs more vibrant scatter cushions and a cheerful accent wall. Or perhaps, having observed her from afar, and a quirky tidbit is that Hades possessed a powerful artifact, the Helm of Invisibility, also known as the Cap of Hades, given to him by the Cyclopes during the Titanomachy, which would have allowed him to move about unseen and observe the world above without anyone being the wiser. He was simply smitten by her innocent charm. Whatever his exact motivations, desperate loneliness, a desire for beauty, or perhaps even a very poorly thought-out plan to improve interdepartmental relations between the upper and lower worlds, Hades has set his sights on Persephone. He's decided she will be his queen, and being a god, especially one of the big three, he's not really the type to send a polite dinner invitation and hope for the best. His method of courtship, as you're about to discover, is going to be considerably more direct and a whole lot more disruptive to Persephone's hitherto peaceful, flower-filled existence. The Lord of the Underworld is about to make a house call, and our unsuspecting Maiden of the Spring is in for the vacation of a lifetime, whether she likes it or not. So, Hades, our lonely king of the underworld, has made up his mind. He's not about to send a delicately scented papyrus note via Hermes. The divine messenger boy, asking Persephone if she's free for, say, the next eternity. As we pondered in the last section, oh no, his methods, you'll find are a tad more direct and significantly less reliant on polite social niceties. And our carefree flower child? Persephone, still blissfully unaware of her admirer in the gloom below. Remember her, frolicking in those sun-drenched meadows, probably debating the merits of a new daisy chain design, is about to receive an invitation she literally cannot refuse. Think of it as an express delivery service, straight to your new, rather shadowy, vacation home. You find Persephone on what seems like just another perfect, golden afternoon. She's in a lush meadow, perhaps the mythical plain of Nysa, or Enna in Sicily, a place bursting with life and color. She's not alone. Her usual companions, the Okeanides or Naiads, those graceful, giggling water nymphs, are with her, all of them engaged in the very serious business of gathering flowers. They're weaving garlands, their laughter echoing lightly in the warm air. The scene a picture of idyllic innocence. The sun is shining, the bees are buzzing a lazy tune, and there's not a hint of trouble in the world. It's the kind of day where you just know nothing could possibly go wrong, which, in Greek mythology, is usually your cue to brace for impact. As Persephone wanders, her eye is caught by a bloom unlike any she has ever seen before. Some stories say it was a narcissus, but no ordinary one. This flower, perhaps specially created by Gaia, the earth goddess, or even with a nod from Zeus himself, was an irresistible lure. It might have had 100 blossoms stemming from a single root, or a fragrance so intoxicating it reached the highest heavens and the deepest seas. This wasn't just any old buttercup from the field. This was the A-list celebrity of flowers, the kind that makes all the other flowers in the meadow feel a bit frumpy and insecure. Oh, you have 5 petals and a lovely yellow center. That's quaint. I, on the other hand, have 100 blossoms, and I smell like divine intervention and a hint of impending doom. Naturally, Persephone, a connoisseur of all things floral, is utterly captivated. She strays a little from her companions, drawn by its unique beauty, her hand reaching out to pluck this magnificent specimen, and just as her fingers brush against its stem, the very earth beneath her feet groans. A deep rumble, a tremor, and then, with a terrifying suddenness, the ground splits wide open. A yawning chasm appears, a dark, gaping maw leading down into unimaginable blackness. Perhaps a faint, sulphurous smell, like ancient, disappointed eggs, drifts up from the depths. The nymphs scream, scattering in terror, their half-woven garlands falling to the grass. Before Persephone can even fully register what's happening, a chariot, black as polished obsidian and wrought of gold, pulled by 4 powerful, immortal black horses with eyes like burning coals, erupts from the chasm, and holding the reins, his expression stern and set, his presence radiating a chill that cuts through the warm afternoon air, is Hades himself, king of the underworld. He's not exactly the subtle type when making an entrance, despite owning that rather useful helm of invisibility we talked about. But when you're making a statement, and essentially kidnapping your future queen, you make a statement. He doesn't waste time with pleasantries or introductions. With a swift, practiced movement, he leans down, seizes the terrified Persephone, and pulls her into the chariot beside him. She cries out, a high, piercing shriek of fear and surprise that echoes across the meadow, a sound that will later haunt her mother. But it's too late. Hades whips the reins. The black horses plunge back towards the gaping hole, and in an instant the chariot, the god, and the unwilling maiden disappear into the earth. The chasm slams shut behind them as if it were never there, leaving only the scent of crushed flowers, the scattered nymphs, and a sudden chilling silence where moments before there had been laughter and sunshine. Persephone's RSVP to this surprise vacation was more of a startled scream as she was unceremoniously bundled into a golden chariot heading south. Very, very south. You should always check your spam folder. Kids, sometimes those Underworld timeshare offers are surprisingly aggressive and non-negotiable. This dramatic event, the abduction of Persephone, known in Greek as the Harpagmos, is a central and pivotal episode in Greek mythology. It's not just a footnote, it's the event that sets in motion a whole chain of divine drama, and it's prominently featured in ancient texts, most notably the Homeric hymn to Demeter, which is one of our primary ancient sources for the full, detailed story of Persephone's invitation and its consequences. This mainstream historical fact means we have a fairly good idea of how the ancient Greeks themselves envisioned this startling moment. In the immediate aftermath, only two deities are said to have noticed anything amiss from their lofty vantage points. Helios, the all-seeing sun god, who sees everything that happens under his daily journey across the sky, and Hecate, the mysterious goddess of magic, witchcraft, and crossroads, who heard Persephone's cry from her cave. Demeter, Persephone's mother, busy overseeing the ripening grain somewhere else, remains blissfully and tragically unaware of her daughter's sudden departure. Mythographers and classicists, those diligent scholars who spend their lives untangling the complex family dramas of the Greek gods, continue to debate the level of Zeus's complicity in this whole affair. Did the king of Olympus give his brother Hades a subtle nod, a kind of divine go-ahead for this unconventional method of acquiring a queen? Some ancient sources certainly suggest he either tacitly approved or perhaps even actively aided Hades by causing that special flower to bloom. Other versions portray the abduction as solely Hades' rather impulsive initiative. These differing interpretations highlight the ever-shifting power dynamics and sometimes questionable moral compass of the Olympian gods. For now, though, all that matters is that Persephone, our maiden of the spring, has vanished from the world of light, whisked away on a one-way trip to a realm she never knew existed, leaving behind a bewildered silence and the first seeds of a mother's unimaginable grief. Her casual vacation has, it seems, begun rather abruptly. So, Persephone has just been unceremoniously invited on her surprise subterranean vacation by Hades, as we saw in a flash of dark chariot and startled, scattering nymphs in the previous section. Back on that now empty meadow, the special narcissus she was about to pick is probably already starting to look a bit forlorn, a tiny, sad foreshadowing of what's about to hit the entire planet, thanks to one very, very unhappy mother, the powerful goddess Demeter. When a goddess of harvest and fertility gets upset, you can bet the consequences are going to be more severe than just a strongly worded letter to the Olympian management. Initially, Demeter is unaware of the dramatic turn of events. Perhaps she's overseeing a particularly promising barley field in another part of the world, or ensuring the olive groves are feeling suitably fruitful. But as the hours pass and Persephone doesn't return with her nymph companions from their flower-gathering expedition, a cold dread begins to creep into Demeter's heart. The nymphs, when they finally gather the courage to report back, can only say that Persephone was there one moment, reaching for a wondrous flower and gone the next, with a rumble from the earth. They didn't see who took her or where she went. This is when Demeter goes into full divine panic mode, which, as you can imagine, is considerably more intense than a mortal parent losing their child in a crowded marketplace. For 9 days and 9 nights, she searches, forsaking ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods. She doesn't bathe, she doesn't rest, holding blazing torches in each hand, a symbol of her desperate, unceasing quest. She roams the earth, calling out her daughter's name, her voice filled with anguish. You can picture her, a once radiant goddess now cloaked in dark robes, her face etched with worry and sorrow, tirelessly scouring every mountain, every valley, every hidden grove. Demeter went full divine detective mode, probably interrogating every squirrel, every dryad, every river god she came across. Did you see a bright, flower-loving maiden? Answers to core? Possibly being chauffeured downwards at high speed by a rather gloomy fellow in a dark, flashy chariot? No, utterly useless, the lot of you. Finally, on the 10th day, she encounters Hecate, the goddess of magic and crossroads, who, as we know, had heard Persephone's cry. Hecate, carrying her own torch, approaches Demeter with compassion and confirms that she indeed heard the maiden's shriek as she was being dragged away, but she didn't see the culprit. Hecate, however, has a sensible suggestion they should go and ask Helios, the sun god. Helios, with his chariot of the sun, travels across the sky every day and sees everything that happens on Earth. If anyone knows what happened to Persephone, it's him. So, the two grieving goddesses approach Helios, and Helios, being the ancient world's equivalent of a celestial CCTV system with a very wide-angle lens, finally spills the beans. He tells Demeter the truth: it was Hades, her own brother, king of the Underworld, who abducted Persephone to be his unwilling bride. And, to add insult to cosmic injury, Helios implies that Zeus, king of the gods and Persephone's own father, either consented to this arrangement or at least turned a blind eye. Yeah, saw the whole thing. You can almost hear Helios saying, trying to sound nonchalant. Hades had a chariot? Zeus probably signed off on it. Standard Olympian family stuff. You know. Anyway, don't shoot the messenger. Ladies, talk about an awkward and devastating news delivery. Demeter is, understandably, beyond furious. She's consumed by a grief so profound and a rage so immense that she makes a decision that will affect every living thing. She renounces her divine duties. She abandons her seat on Mount Olympus. As the goddess of agriculture, fertility, and the harvest, her withdrawal means the earth itself begins to mourn with her. She causes a terrible drought and famine to spread across the land. Seeds refuse to sprout. Plants wither and die. Trees bear no fruit. And the fields that once teemed with golden grain become barren. Cracked earth. This is Demeter's global freeze, her sorrow manifesting as a creeping, relentless winter that grips the world. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, our main ancient source for this tale, vividly describes this period of blight and the suffering it caused, directly linking the goddess's personal anguish to the cessation of all earthly fertility. Her grief was so powerful, she essentially put the entire planet on an involuntary and very unwelcome intermittent fasting plan with a side order of extreme cold. The original hangry, but on a global, divine scale. During this time of wandering and sorrow, disguised as an old mortal woman named Doso, Demeter has many encounters, but one of the most famous, a quirky and telling tidbit, occurs when she takes refuge in the household of King Celeus of Eleusis, hired as a nurse for the king's infant son, Demophon. Demeter, in her grief and perhaps in a strange attempt to find some solace or create a new kind of immortality, tries to make the baby godlike. Each night, she secretly anoints him with divine ambrosia and places him in the heart of the roaring hearth fire to burn away his mortal parts. Unfortunately, the baby's mother, Metanira, walks in on this rather alarming nightly ritual, screams in terror, and breaks the spell. Demeter, annoyed at being interrupted mid-deification, reveals her true divine form and, though Demophon doesn't become immortal, she commands that rites be established in her honor at Eleusis, the very beginnings of the Eleusinian mysteries we mentioned earlier. This episode, while a detour from the main plot of Famine, shows her in a powerful, altered state, a goddess consumed by loss. Back in the wider world, mortals are starving. They can no longer offer sacrifices to the gods because there is no grain, no fruit, no animals to offer. The gods on Olympus start to get a bit antsy. Their altars are empty, their honors are dwindling, and Zeus, looking down at the barren earth and the suffering humans, realizes that Demeter's protest is not just a passing tantrum. The situation is unsustainable. If humanity perishes, who will be left to worship the gods? Scholars of comparative mythology continue to debate whether this powerful story of Demeter's withdrawal and the ensuing global winter is a purely ideological myth, a narrative designed simply to explain the origin of the seasons and the annual cycle of growth and decay, or if it also reflects deeper, ancient societal anxieties about the terrifying possibility of crop failure, the immense power attributed to mother goddesses and earth deities, and the delicate, often precarious balance between the human world and the divine realm. For now, though, the world is in crisis. The laughter of Persephone in the flower-filled meadows has been replaced by the chilling silence of a barren earth, all because of a mother's boundless love and a god's profound sorrow. Demeter has effectively put the entire planet on hold, a divine strike action until her daughter is returned. And it's becoming increasingly clear that someone, probably Zeus, is going to have to do something. And soon, before this casual vacation in the underworld turns into a permanent global catastrophe. So, while Demeter is upstairs, back on the sunlit Earth, launching her impressive campaign of global superchilling out of sheer heartbroken rage, as we saw in her dramatic Global Freeze initiative. What about Persephone herself? Her surprise invitation downstairs. As we rather euphemistically called that quite abrupt and frankly terrifying chariot ride, has just concluded. She's arrived. After that dizzying, dark plunge from the world of light and flowers, the black chariot finally skids to a halt. Welcome to the underworld, darling. Hope you didn't make extensive plans for, well, sunshine and fresh air for the foreseeable future. You can imagine Persephone, still trembling, perhaps clutching a few bruised wildflowers she instinctively grabbed before being whisked away, blinking in the gloom as Hades assists her from his formidable chariot. The journey itself was probably a blur of darkness, speed, the roar of wind in her ears, and the chilling sense of falling away from everything she knew and loved. The sound of the earth crashing shut above them like a stone door would have sealed the finality of it all. Now, she finds herself standing at the threshold of Hades' domain, his actual home. This isn't just a temporary stopover, this is the main event of her involuntary vacation package. Her first impression is likely one of overwhelming absence. An absence of light, an absence of warmth, an absence of color, an absence of life as she understands it. The air is cool and still, perhaps with a faint, musty smell of ancient dust, damp stone, and something else. Something vaguely metallic or sulfurous that she can't quite place. Before her looms the palace of Hades, a structure vast and imposing, built of dark, polished stone, perhaps ebony, basalt, or some other Stygian material. It's grand, undoubtedly, in a severe and somber way, reflecting the status of its ruler, but it's a grandeur utterly devoid of joy. There are no cheerful frescoes on these walls, no sun-drenched courtyards filled with flowers and birdsong. Instead, there are long, echoing corridors, vast, empty halls, and perhaps intricate carvings depicting scenes from the underworld, which probably aren't the most uplifting murals to gaze upon when you've just been kidnapped. Think goth minimalist with a heavy touch of eternal despair chic. The interior designer was probably a very depressed bat, with a strong preference for shades of gray and perpetual twilight. Persephone, our maiden of spring, must feel utterly bewildered, terrified and heartbroken. One moment she was in a meadow, bright with sunshine and the laughter of her nymph companions, and the next, she's in this place, this silent, shadowy, and profoundly unsettling kingdom. She's disoriented, grieving for her lost world, for her mother Demeter, whose anguished cries she can almost imagine. She's a splash of vibrant, terrified life in a realm of muted, eternal stillness. Hades himself, now on his home turf, might try to adopt the air of a gracious, if somewhat socially awkward, host. He probably gestures towards his throne, a massive, ornate seat of black stone, perhaps with another slightly smaller one beside it, implicitly inviting her to take her place as his queen. Welcome to my humble, if somewhat subterranean, abode. You can almost hear him in tone. His voice is deep and resonant as a tomb. Do make yourself comfortable. Ignore the persistent moaning shades you might see flitting about in the corners. They're just part of the ambiance. Can I offer you a seat on this rather imposing throne made of solidified gloom and good intentions? His attempts to explain the situation, or perhaps to reassure her that this is all perfectly normal in the grand scheme of divine matchmaking, likely fall on deaf ears, or rather ears still ringing with the shock of her abduction. The power imbalance is palpable. He is a mighty god, ruler of this vast domain, and she is his captive, a terrified young goddess far from home. her first impressions of the realm beyond the palace gates, should she glimpse them, would be no more comforting. The light, if you can call it that, is a dim, perpetual twilight, perhaps emanating from unseen braziers, the ghostly luminescence of the river Styx, or just an inherent property of the underworld's atmosphere. The silence is profound, broken only by the faint, dry whisper of shades, the distant, mournful howl of Cerberus Hades' three-headed guard dog, whom we'll meet properly later, or the drip, drip, drip of water in some unseen cavern. The welcome package at Hotel Hades was a bit thin, you imagine. No complimentary fruit basket, no minibar stocked with tiny nectars. Just a pervasive sense of dread and surprisingly excellent acoustics for dramatic sighing. It's a mainstream historical fact that Hades' realm was considered by the ancient Greeks to be largely inescapable once a soul, or an unwilling goddess, had properly entered it. Heroes like Heracles, Orpheus, or Theseus, who managed to journey into the underworld and return to the land of the living, were exceptionally rare cases. Their descents and ascents fraught with immense peril and usually requiring divine assistance. This grim reality would only add to Persephone's sense of being utterly trapped in this arrival lounge of eternity. Interestingly, while the underworld was a mythological concept, a quirky tidbit is that the ancient Greeks and Romans often associated its entrances with specific, real-world geographical locations. Caves like the one at Cape Tainaron in Laconia, or areas near volcanic lakes like Avernus in Italy, were believed to be actual portals to Hades' domain, places where the veil between worlds was thin. One wonders if Persephone's dramatic descent occurred through one such fabled spot. Classicists and literary scholars continue to analyze the psychological portrayal of Persephone in the various ancient texts that recount her story. They debate whether her initial response upon arriving in the underworld is primarily one of passive victimhood, a silent, stunned shock that renders her incapable of action, or if there are already subtle hints of an emerging, albeit deeply suppressed, resilience or curiosity about this strange new world she's been thrust into. Is she merely a wilting flower? Or is there a core of divine strength beginning to stir within her? Even in these first terrifying moments. For now, though, as she stands in the vast, cold hall of Hades' palace, the weight of her predicament settles upon her. This isn't a brief visit. There are no return tickets being offered. This is her new reality, her unexpected and entirely unwelcome. Permanent vacation. The Lord of the Dead has claimed his queen, and Persephone, the Maiden of Spring, finds herself checked in for an indefinite stay in the gloomiest kingdom imaginable. So, Persephone has officially checked into the Underworld Hilton, as we saw in the previous section. And Hades, ever the attentive host and, let's be frank, her rather insistent kidnapper, probably figures it's time for the grand tour of his domain. This isn't your typical holiday orientation. Mind you, with cheerful guides pointing out the best spots for a sunset cocktail. It's more of a get-to-know-your new, eternally gloomy surroundings kind of excursion. To your left, you'll observe the river of unending woe. To your right, our state-of-the-art three-headed security system who really doesn't appreciate unannounced departures. Do try to enjoy your indefinite stay. Perhaps Hades, in an attempt to make her feel something other than sheer terror and despair, decides to show her the key sights, the famous landmarks of his kingdom. He might lead her from his dark, echoing palace, his black chariot probably parked in some Stygian multi-story cavern, towards the first major feature any new arrival would encounter, one of the great rivers of the underworld. Let's say it's the river Styx, the river of unbreakable oaths, or perhaps Acheron, the river of pain. Its waters are dark, oily, and sluggish, flowing silently through the vast gloom. And waiting on the bank, with his rickety ferry, is Charon, the ancient, unkempt, and perennially grumpy ferryman of the dead. His job is to transport the souls of the newly deceased across the river to their final resting place. But only if they have the fare, an obol, a small coin, traditionally placed in the mouth of the deceased by their relatives during funeral rites. Charon. You see, it was the original grumpy ferryman, probably with a strict no small talk, no eye contact, and definitely no trying to pay with exposure policy. A quirky and rather grim tidbit is that if a soul arrived without their coin, or if they hadn't received proper burial rites, Charon would refuse them passage, leaving them to wander the desolate banks for 100 years. One imagines a slight awkwardness as Persephone, a living goddess and decidedly undeceased, approaches. Does she need a ticket? Hades probably just gives Charon the look, and he grudgingly ferries them across, muttering about special privileges and the decline in professional standards. Once across the river, they'd approach the very gates of Hades' realm proper, and here you'd meet the chief of security, Cerberus. This isn't your friendly neighborhood Labrador. Cerberus is a monstrous three-headed hound, with a serpent for a tail, a mane of writhing snakes, and a bark that could curdle the blood of the bravest hero. His job is to prevent the dead from escaping and the living from entering uninvited. As Hades and Persephone approach, you can imagine Cerberus giving a few earth-shaking growls, his multiple sets of eyes fixing on the unfamiliar goddess. But with a word or a gesture from his master, Hades, the beast, would likely settle, perhaps even offering a grudging, rumbling tail wag for the king. Cerberus part guard dog? Part nope? You're absolutely not leaving welcoming committee. All three heads equally unimpressed with any attempts to sneak out for a quick breath of fresh air. Good boy, highly debatable. Effective deterrent, undeniably. Beyond the gates, Hades might show Persephone the Asphodel Meadows. This is the vast, gray, and rather monotonous plain where the souls of most ordinary people, those who were neither exceptionally good nor exceptionally wicked in life, spend eternity. It's an endless expanse, carpeted with pale, ghostly asphodel flowers, the only vegetation that seems to thrive in this dim light. Here, the shades of the dead flit about like bats or shadows, whispering, insubstantial, often having lost much of their memory and personality from drinking from the river Lethe, forgetfulness upon arrival. They are not suffering, exactly, but they are not joyful either. They simply exist. The Asphodel Meadows where souls go for an eternity of, well, mostly just existing, very quietly, in a sort of perpetual, low-grade ennui. Think of it as the universe's most boring, never-ending waiting room. The highlight of the eon is probably when a new, equally bored shade arrives to join the silent, drifting crowd. Classicists continue to debate the symbolic significance of this particular region of the underworld, questioning whether the Asphodel Meadows represented a truly neutral, passionless state or a subtly melancholic one, reflecting ancient Greek anxieties about the fading of individual consciousness and vitality after death. Perhaps Hades, in his grand tour, would also point out the fields of mourning, a more sorrowful region reserved for those who died of a broken heart or unrequited love, forever pining for what they lost. And from a safe distance, he might indicate the immense, dark walls of Tartarus, the deepest, most terrible abyss of the underworld, where the Titans were imprisoned after their war with the gods, and where the truly heinous sinners, like Sisyphus forever rolling his boulder, or Tantalus forever reaching for food and water just out of his grasp, endured their eternal, inventive punishments. Probably not a place for a leisurely stroll. To show it's not all gloom and despair, or perhaps to highlight his just and orderly rule, Hades might even offer Persephone a glimpse of the Elysian Fields, or Elysium. This was the paradisiacal corner of the underworld, reserved for heroes, demigods, and those mortals deemed exceptionally virtuous by the gods. Here the light is brighter, gentle breezes blow, music plays, and the inhabitants enjoy an eternity of blissful leisure, feasting, and pleasant conversation. It's a stark contrast to the rest of his domain, a little pocket of eternal springtime in the land of shades. The ancient Greeks, you see, had a very well-established geography of the underworld, a mainstream historical fact detailed in their myths and literature. It wasn't just a vague, shadowy place. It had distinct regions, famous rivers like the Styx, Acheron, Lethe, Phlegethon the river of fire, and Cocytus the river of wailing, all forming a consistent, if rather terrifying, map of the afterlife. As Persephone is taken on this highlights tour, she sees the vastness, the order, and the inescapable nature of Hades' kingdom. She sees the endless river of new arrivals, the unyielding guardian at the gate, the countless silent shades. Her own reactions during this tour are likely a mixture of continued fear, profound sadness for her lost world, and perhaps a dawning, chilling understanding of the realm she is now expected to inhabit. Maybe a flicker of horrified curiosity, or even a touch of divine resilience as she takes in the sheer scale and immutable laws of this place. This is Hades' world, his responsibility, and now, in his mind at least, it is to be hers too. The less than sunny tour, with its distinct lack of souvenir shops or pleasant cafes, eventually concludes, perhaps back at the dark, imposing palace, leaving Persephone with a much clearer and infinitely more depressing picture of her new involuntary vacation spot. So, after that rather bleak, if comprehensive sightseeing tour of the Underworld's prime real estate, from the surprisingly pleasant members-only club of Elysium to the eternal cosmic detention center of Tartarus, as we just witnessed, Persephone might start to wonder about the actual, well, people who populate this vast, shadowy kingdom. It's not just about the gloomy rivers like the Styx or impressively multi-headed guard dogs like Cerberus. There's a whole citizenry of the deceased to get acquainted with, or at least to observe from a safe, if somewhat bewildered, goddess-like distance. This is the part of the vacation where you meet the locals, though in this particular resort, the locals are notably lacking in get up and go. Her first and most numerous encounters would be with the ordinary shades in those endless asphodel meadows we glimpsed. Imagine her, a figure of vibrant, if currently very subdued, life, moving among these pale, fluttering entities. The shades of the dead, for the most part, are not solid. They are like wisps of smoke, like shadows, their forms indistinct and translucent. They often speak in soft, dry whispers, like the rustling of dead leaves or the sighing of wind through barren branches. Many of them, having drunk from the waters of the river Lethe upon their arrival, have forgotten their former lives, their passions, their identities. They retain only faint impressions, a lingering sense of who they once were, but without the clarity or the will that animated them in the world above. They just sort of exist, drifting aimlessly through the gray fields. The shades in Asphodel Meadows weren't exactly party animals, more like party phantoms. Their idea of a wild eternity was probably a particularly strong gust of subterranean wind, rustling their incorporeal forms in a slightly different direction. You can picture Persephone, perhaps still clutching a wilted flower from her meadow, trying to interact with them. She, a goddess full of life, might try to speak to a shade, to ask it about its former existence, only to receive a faint, confused whisper in reply, or for the shade to simply drift away, uncomprehending. It must be a profoundly alienating experience. This inability to connect, to find recognition in these countless, listless souls. Hades might explain to her, in his calm, matter-of-fact way, that this is simply the nature of most mortals after death. Their fire extinguished, their memories faded, their essence reduced to a mere echo. Classicists and philosophers continue to explore the ancient Greek understanding of personal identity and consciousness after death, debating whether these shades in the Asphodel Meadows were considered truly themselves in any meaningful way, or merely insubstantial echoes lacking true selfhood and individual awareness. Then there are the more memorable residents, those whose actions in life earned them a rather more distinct and less forgettable eternity, particularly those in Tartarus. If Hades continued his tour, he might show her from a very safe distance. One assumes some of the underworld's most notorious figures. There's Sisyphus, the cunning king who cheated death and now pays for it by eternally rolling an immense boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down just as he nears the summit. You can almost feel the crushing futility of his endless labor. Sisyphus with his boulder the ultimate symbol of a pointless, never-ending task. You just know he tried every trick in the book in the early millennia. What if I try rolling it sideways? Perhaps if I just leave it here for a bit and pretend I didn't see it go. Nope. Cosmic HR is very strict about these eternal performance reviews. Nearby, she might see Tantalus, another king who offended the gods, perhaps by serving them his own son at a banquet, Mythological dinner parties could get really awkward. His punishment is to stand forever in a pool of water that recedes whenever he tries to drink, with fruit-laden branches just above his head that sway out of reach whenever he tries to eat. He is tormented by perpetual hunger and thirst, with relief tantalizingly close but always unattainable. Tantalus, forever thirsty with water just out of reach. It's like being eternally stuck in front of a divine vending machine that only accepts exact change. And all you have is a single, massive, unchangeable gold drachma? For eternity? And there are others Ixion, bound to a perpetually spinning, fiery wheel for daring to desire Hera, Zeus's wife, the Danaïdes, the 50 daughters who murdered their husbands on their wedding night, except for one, now condemned to endlessly try to fill leaky jars or a sieve with water. A task as futile as Sisyphus's. Persephone, witnessing these specific, graphic, and eternal punishments, might feel a mixture of horror, pity, and perhaps a dawning somber understanding of divine justice. These famous sinners enduring their specific torments in Tartarus served as powerful moral exemplars in Greek thought, a mainstream historical fact highlighting how these myths functioned as warnings against hubris, impiety, or betraying the often touchy Olympian gods. In stark contrast, if Hades chose to show her Elysium again, focusing on its inhabitants, she would see the shades of heroes like Achilles, Ajax, or a part of Heracles as his divine immortal self was on Olympus. Here, the shades are more substantial, more themselves. They retain their memories, their personalities, and engage in pleasant activities like feasting, conversing, or enjoying athletic pursuits in a sunlit or at least less gloomy meadow. They might even acknowledge Persephone with more awareness and respect than the flitting shadows of the asphodel fields. Somewhere in this vast kingdom, too, reside the three judges of the dead Minos, Rhadamanthus and Aeacus. These were once mortal kings famed for their wisdom and justice, and now, in the afterlife, they preside over the judgment of souls, determining who goes to Elysium, who is condemned to Tartarus, and who is destined for the neutral monotony of the asphodel meadows. Persephone might see their stern, impartial figures seated on thrones, weighing the lives of the newly arrived, a quirky, though not directly relevant to Persephone's initial interactions. Tidbit from mythology, most famously from Odysseus's journey to the Underworld in the Odyssey, is that some shades could temporarily regain their memories, their voices, and a semblance of their former selves if they were allowed to drink a libation of blood. This suggests that their usual state of forgetfulness and insubstantiality was the norm, but not absolutely irreversible under special circumstances. One also hears of shades sometimes pestering new arrivals with mournful questions about the world above, desperate for any scrap of news from the lives they left behind. For Persephone, this ongoing encounter with the locals of the underworld, from the countless, nameless, whispering shades to the infamous sufferers and the blessed heroes, must be a profoundly unsettling education. Each interaction, or lack thereof, reinforces the alien nature of this realm. It's a kingdom of echoes, of consequences, of eternal states. It's a far cry from her sunlit meadows and laughing nymph companions. This isn't just a change of scenery for her vacation, it's an introduction to a completely different order of existence, one that she is now, somehow, supposed to be a part of. The guest book here is very, very long, and the checkout process is notoriously difficult. So, after Persephone has had the unique and rather chilling experience of meeting the locals of the underworld, from the perpetually bored whispering shades of the asphodel meadows to the eternally frustrated Sisyphus with his very uncooperative boulder as we explored in our last rather gloomy chat, you might well wonder how she's personally coping with her extended, entirely involuntary stay. This isn't exactly a vacation where you can just pack your bags, leave a scathing review on Underworld Advisor, and demand a refund if the amenities, like sunshine or cheerful company, aren't up to snuff. She's here, and for now. Here is a vast, shadowy palace in the land of the dead. You can imagine her initial days, or what pass for days in this timeless, twilight realm, are filled with profound grief, fear, and an aching loneliness. She misses her mother, Demeter, with a fierceness that probably feels like a physical pain. She misses the warmth of the sun on her skin, the scent of wildflowers, the vibrant colors of the world above, the gentle laughter of her nymph companions. Everything here is a stark, oppressive contrast: the dim, flickering light from unseen braziers, the cold touch of stone, the overwhelming silence broken only by unsettling whispers or the distant, mournful howls of Cerberus. Time itself probably feels distorted, an endless, unchanging expanse of gloom, with no dawn to look forward to, no sunset to mark a day's end. Hades, her captor and now, by his own decree, her husband and king, is a constant, if perhaps often silent, presence. Does he try to comfort her? Perhaps in his own stern, unpracticed way. He might offer her delicacies of the underworld, though what those might be is anyone's guess. Probably not sun-ripened figs. He might point out the gloomy splendors of his palace, the intricate carvings in black basalt, the thrones of polished ebony, the gleam of hoarded gold and silver that doesn't quite catch any real light. Persephone, my dear, you can almost hear him intone awkwardly. I've had the servants polish the obsidian floors to a particularly high sheen, just for you. And I've instructed Cerberus to only wag one of his many tails when you pass by, as a sign of, well, managed ferocity in your honor. He was probably trying, bless his gloomy subterranean cotton socks. But for Persephone, these attempts at hospitality would likely just underscore her captivity and the alien nature of her new surroundings. Their cohabitation must be a masterpiece of divine awkwardness. Slowly, though, very slowly. Because what else is there to do but endure? A subtle shift might begin. Not happiness, not acceptance, but perhaps a dulling of the initial raw terror. She might start to explore her immediate surroundings within the palace. If Hades allows it, or if he simply leaves her to her own devices in her designated chambers, she might find herself tracing the patterns in a dark tapestry, or staring out of a vast, unglazed window at the unchanging, misty landscape of the Asphodel Meadows. Persephone probably started trying to redecorate her gloomy palace chamber in her mind. Does this particular cavernous hall come in a slightly less soul-crushing shade of gray? No, right then. Perhaps a nice, cheerful pot of... Oh, wait, absolutely nothing grows down here. Does it? Never mind. This isn't to say she's becoming content. Far from it. But the human, or in this case, divine spirit has a remarkable capacity for adaptation, even in the most unpromising circumstances. A mainstream historical fact from ancient Greek culture is that women, upon marriage, were expected to leave their natal homes and adapt to their husband's household, a significant and often challenging transition. Persephone's situation is, of course, an extreme and involuntary version of this, a marriage by abduction to a new, utterly alien home. Her slow, reluctant settling in could be seen, in part, through this cultural lens. She might begin to observe the strange, orderly workings of the underworld with a kind of detached, mournful curiosity rather than just paralyzing fear. She sees the endless procession of new shades arriving, the silent efficiency of Hades' administration because even the land of the dead needs good management. Apparently, perhaps out of sheer crushing boredom, she might even take a reluctant, fleeting interest in the paperwork or the protocols of her new kingdom. Oh, look, Hades, another soul complaining about the fairy fair? Fascinating. Do we have a standard form for that? A quirky or fringe interpretation, sometimes hinted at in later retellings or artistic depictions, suggests that Persephone might have eventually found a strange, desolate kind of beauty in certain aspects of the underworld. Perhaps in the eerie glow of subterranean crystals, the profound, unbroken silence of some of its deeper chambers, or even in the pale, ghostly elegance of the asphodel flowers themselves, a stark, minimalist aesthetic so utterly different from the vibrant abundance of the world above. It's like developing a taste for very, very minimalist black and white art after a lifetime of Technicolor. Psychological interpretations of the myth often debate the true nature of Persephone's adaptation during this period. Is it the beginning of a Stockholm syndrome? like acceptance of her powerful captor and her new reality? Is it a pragmatic, almost stoic adjustment to an utterly inescapable situation? Or, more intriguingly, are these early moments the first stirrings of her own intrinsic divine power beginning to assert itself? A quiet resilience taking root as she starts to understand, and perhaps eventually influence, the very realm that holds her captive. Her transformation from the carefree maiden core to the formidable queen of the underworld doesn't happen overnight. For now, as you picture her in those vast, somber halls, the initial shock has perhaps subsided into a deep, abiding sorrow, but also a kind of watchful stillness. She is no longer just the weeping, terrified girl snatched from the meadow. The options for escape are non-existent. The power of Hades and the immutable laws of his realm are absolute. So, she endures. She observes. She breathes the cool, damp air of the underworld and, in her own way, begins to exist within it. She has settled in, not with joy, not with consent, but with the quiet, enduring strength of a goddess finding her footing in the deepest, darkest place imaginable. Her involuntary vacation is turning into a very long-term stay, and the first reluctant steps towards her future role are perhaps unknowingly being taken. So, Persephone has reluctantly started to, shall we say, acclimatize in the loosest possible sense to her new subterranean timeshare. As we discussed in the previous section, she's not exactly sending cheerful, flower-scented postcards back to Demeter raving about the local sights or the delightful lack of sunburn. But the initial paralyzing shock of her abduction has perhaps given way to a very long, very gloomy sigh of resignation. Now, Hades, her rather imposing host and self-appointed husband, having successfully acquired his queen through that rather dramatic real estate maneuver involving a chasm and a chariot, faces the arguably more delicate challenge of, well, getting her to actually be his queen, beyond just being geographically present and accounted for in his dark, echoing palace. This, what you imagine, is where the awkward courtship phase begins. You have to remember, Hades, despite being a mighty god and ruler of a vast domain, isn't exactly known for his social graces or romantic finesse. His experience with, shall we say, positive interpersonal relationships is probably somewhat limited, given his usual clientele consists of silent shades and eternally tormented sinners. But he didn't go to all the trouble of that surprise invitation just to have a miserable, weeping statue in his throne room. He presumably wanted a companion, a co-ruler, someone to share the unique charms of governing the afterlife. His loneliness, as we've touched upon, was likely a significant motivator. So he probably decides it's time to try and win her over, or at least make her stay slightly less unbearable. What kind of gifts do you offer a goddess of springtime when you're the lord of all things dark and subterranean? It's a bit of a head-scratcher. He can't exactly nip out and pick her a fresh bouquet of daffodils. So he likely offers her the treasures of his realm. My dearest Persephone. You can almost hear him boom, his voice probably making the stalactites quiver slightly. I've had my finest ghostly artisans craft you this rather fetching necklace of solidified tears of the eternally damned, each one catching the dim light in a unique, sorrowful way. And look, this charming little paperweight, a genuine fragment from Sisyphus's boulder. Quite the conversation starter. He might shower her with precious metals, gold, silver, gems wrested from the deep earth, things that glitter coldly in the gloom but hold none of the warmth or life she craves. He might offer her dark, rich fabrics, robes of deepest purple or black, embroidered with silver thread and patterns of bare, wintry branches or swirling Stygian mists. He might even have a second throne prepared for her beside his own, perhaps slightly less intimidating, upholstered in, well, probably still something quite somber, maybe velvet made from the wings of very melancholic bats. He might also try to impress her with the scale and order of his kingdom, a continuation of that initial tour, but this time with a look what you get to co-manage kind of vibe. He'd show her the vastness of his domain, the meticulous if grim way it's administered, the absolute obedience of his subjects who, to be fair, don't have much choice in the matter. All this, Persephone, can be ours to rule. You shall be honored, respected by every shade that crosses the Styx. Think of the power, the majesty. He's trying to sell her on the perks of being queen of the underworld, which, from her perspective, probably sounds about as appealing as a timeshare in Tartarus. In terms of creature comforts, he'd do what he could, within the rather strict limitations of a realm entirely devoid of sunshine. Perhaps he'd try to create a special garden for her within the palace grounds, planted not with flowers that need light, but with strange, pale, bioluminescent fungi, or trees whose leaves are made of hammered bronze that whisper in the subterranean drafts. He would certainly assign servants to attend her, though these would likely be silent shades or perhaps, as a quirky tidbit, some of the lesser chthonic deities or spirits, like the lampades, torch-bearing nymphs of the underworld, who might be tasked with lighting her chambers or accompanying her through the dimmer corridors of the palace. A rather spooky entourage for a goddess of spring. And Persephone's reaction to all this. You can imagine her, still pale, still mournful, her eyes constantly searching for a glimmer of sunlight that will never come. His gifts of cold jewels and dark fabrics likely feel like more chains binding her to this unwelcome place. His boasts about his kingdom's power probably just remind her of her own powerlessness. His attempts at conversation, if he makes them, are likely met with silence or quiet, sorrowful responses. So, Persephone, did you, see any particularly interesting shades shuffling through the asphodel meadows today? That Achilles fellow still going on about his heel, is he good times? Good times. Cue the sound of, well, the underworld equivalent of crickets, which is probably just more profound, echoing silence and the distant drip of Stygian water. The incompatibility of their natures, she, the essence of life and light, he, the personification of death and darkness, must seem an insurmountable chasm. It's important to consider this within the context of ancient Greek societal norms. A mainstream historical fact is that marriage gamos in ancient Greece was often an arrangement between the groom and the bride's father, with the bride herself having very little say in the matter. Once married, she was expected to adapt to her husband's household oikos and fulfill her role as wife and, eventually, mother. While Persephone's situation is an abduction, an extreme form of acquiring a bride, Hades is, in his own rather twisted and divinely entitled way, attempting to establish a version of this expected household, with her as its reluctant mistress. Mythologists and feminist scholars often debate the portrayal of Hades' courtship in the various tellings of the myth. The central question is whether any of his actions, given the fundamental fact of her captivity, can be interpreted as genuinely affectionate or well-intentioned, or if they solely represent his attempts to consolidate his power over her, to make her compliant, to normalize an inherently unjust situation. Is he a lonely god fumbling towards connection, or simply a powerful ruler ensuring his prize remains by his side? It's a debate that adds layers of complexity to their interactions. For now, Hades' wooing strategy is, let's be honest, working about as well as trying to grow a field of vibrant sunflowers in the deepest, darkest cave imaginable. Points for persistence, perhaps, but the execution and the understanding of his target audience are clearly lacking. Persephone remains a sorrowful, unwilling guest in his shadowy palace, her heart still firmly rooted in the sunlit world above. The king of the underworld may have captured the maiden, but winning the queen is proving to be a far more difficult, and perhaps impossible, task. His awkward attempts at making her feel at home only serve to highlight just how far from home she truly is. So, Hades' rather elaborate attempts to woo Persephone with the gloomy grandeur of his palace, the power of his kingdom, and perhaps even a specially commissioned throne made of polished obsidian and deepest sorrow, as we saw in his rather awkward courtship phase, haven't exactly been a roaring success. She's still mostly giving him the divine silent treatment, probably spending her endless twilight hours counting the stalactites out of sheer boredom and dreaming vividly of sunshine. Wildflowers, and her mother Demeter, she has quite wisely been refusing all food and drink offered to her in the underworld. Persephone had been on a pretty strict no food or beverages from the land of the permanently deceased diet, which, on to be fair, I probably didn't offer a great culinary selection anyway. Today's special, Your Majesty a delightful dust soup, seasoned with despair, followed by a refreshing cup of chilled river lethe water, guaranteed to make you forget how miserable you are. Enjoy the ancient understanding. You see, Batien, was that to eat the food of a particular place? Especially a supernatural one like the Underworld, was to bind yourself to it, to become a part of it? And Persephone, bless her homesick heart, wants nothing more than to return to the world above. But Hades, being a god of immense power and not one to be easily thwarted when he's set his mind on something, like acquiring a queen, for instance, has one more subtle, and ultimately far more effective trick up his shadowy, metaphorical sleeve. He knows the ancient law. He knows that a single taste, a mere morsel of underworld fare, could tie her to him and his realm forever, or at least for a significant portion of forever. He just needs to find a way to get her to eat something. Anything. The moment, as it's often told, comes when Persephone is perhaps wandering in one of the gloomier palace gardens, or maybe she's simply weak from her long fast and her unceasing sorrow. Hades, or perhaps one of his very discreet underworld attendants, offers her a pomegranate. Just a single, beautiful pomegranate. Its tough, leathery skin perhaps a deep, burnished red, hinting at the treasures within. It looks innocent enough, doesn't it? A fruit? What harm could a fruit do? Especially one so visually appealing, with its promise of juicy, jewel-like seeds. The pomegranate looks pretty, all those glistening ruby-red arils. But in the underworld, it's basically a legally binding contract disguised as a healthy snack, complete with a no-return policy hidden in the pith. Always read the mythological fine print before snacking in Hades. Kids. Now, how exactly she comes to eat it is a matter of some variation in the tellings. In some versions, Hades himself, with a certain cunning tenderness, persuades her, perhaps suggesting it's just a light refreshment, something to ease her hunger after so long. He might gently break it open, revealing the glittering seeds. In other versions, she might be tricked by a sly garden keeper, or perhaps in a moment of profound despair or simple human or divine hunger. She takes it herself, a small act of succumbing to a basic need in an overwhelming situation. Whatever the precise circumstances, the outcome is the same. Persephone, our maiden of spring, eats a few of the pomegranate seeds. The number varies in the myths. Sometimes it's just 3 or 4, sometimes 6 or 7. A seemingly insignificant amount, a tiny, almost casual snack. But that small act has enormous, irrevocable consequences. The ancient, unwritten law of the cosmos, or at least of the underworld, is invoked. By partaking of the food of the dead, by allowing those few sweet tart seeds to pass her lips and nourish her within the confines of Hades' realm, Persephone has forged an undeniable link, a magical, metaphysical bond to the underworld. She is no longer just a visitor, however unwilling. She has become, in a fundamental way, a part of it. The realization of what she has done, or what has been done to her, might dawn on her slowly, or it might be explained by a suddenly triumphant, or perhaps even regretful Hades. That small taste has sealed her fate, at least partially. The pomegranate itself is a deeply symbolic fruit, a mainstream historical fact in ancient Greek culture and mythology. With its multitude of seeds, it was often associated with fertility, abundance, and marriage, all themes relevant to Hades' desire for a queen and the continuation of life, even in the context of death. But conversely, its blood-red juice and its connection to the hidden things of the earth also linked it to death, the afterlife, and the chthonic deities like Persephone herself in her later role. It's the perfect paradoxical fruit for this pivotal moment, bridging life and death, the world above and the world below. A quirky or fringe tidbit that adds another layer of complexity is that in some regional cults or artistic representations, Persephone is actually depicted holding a pomegranate even before her abduction, or it's presented as one of her key symbols alongside flowers or torches. This might suggest a deeper, pre-existing connection to the underworld, an almost fated destiny that the eating of the seeds merely formalizes, rather than initiates out of nowhere. Scholars and mythologists, when they're not debating Zeus's complicity or Hades' original job description, continue to ponder the intentionality behind Persephone's eating of those fateful pomegranate seeds. Was she a completely innocent victim, cleverly tricked by a manipulative Hades who knew exactly what he was doing? Did she act out of a moment of simple, naive hunger and weakness, with no understanding of the ancient magical implications, or, as some more nuanced interpretations suggest, was it perhaps a subconscious, or even a partially conscious, act of accepting a part of her new, inescapable reality? A first tentative step towards embracing her future role and finding some agency within the underworld. It's one of those beautifully ambiguous moments that make Greek myths so endlessly fascinating. Whatever her level of awareness or intent, the deed is done. Those few pomegranate seeds, so small, so seemingly harmless, have altered her destiny, and as we shall see, the destiny of the entire world above. She ate a few tiny seeds, a little afternoon nibble, and suddenly she's locked into a part-time job as Queen of the Gloom for a significant portion of every year. It's the ultimate must-divine, be careful what you snack on when you're on an involuntary extended vacation in a strange, dark place, cautionary tale. The casual snack has become a cosmic contract. So, Persephone has just inadvertently sealed her fate, or at least a significant part of it, with that seemingly innocent, yet cosmically binding, pomegranate snack, the ultimate underworld welcome basket with very tricky terms and conditions. As we just discovered, meanwhile, up on the surface world, her mother Demeter's global freeze program, that rather dramatic protest against her daughter's abduction, remember her turning off the planet's plant-growing switch back in Section 4? Is going splendidly. If by splendidly you mean everything is brown, barren, mortals are starving, and the gods on Mount Olympus are starting to get seriously concerned about the dramatic drop-off in those lovely, fragrant barbecue sacrifices they so enjoy. This, naturally, means it's time for Big Daddy Zeus, king of the gods and master of looking concerned when things get really out of hand, to finally step in and dispatch his most reliable and speediest troubleshooter. Zeus finds himself in a bit of a divine pickle. On one hand, his sister-wife Demeter is on a divine grief strike that's threatening to wipe out all life on Earth, which is generally bad for the long-term worship prospects of the entire Olympian pantheon. On the other hand, his brother Hades has, by ancient if rather forceful tradition, claimed a bride, and interfering in another god's domain, especially the gloomy and powerful lord of the underworld, is not something to be done lightly. Plus, there's that pesky business of Persephone having now tasted the food of the dead. It's a delicate diplomatic situation, requiring tact, speed, and someone who isn't afraid to make a round trip to the gloomiest address in the cosmos. Enter Hermes. Hermes is the divine messenger, the god of travelers, merchants, thieves a useful skill set. That one? Heralds and boundaries. He's the guy with the famous winged sandals, the talaria, that allow him to flit about between worlds faster than you can say divine intervention. He also sports a winged cap, the Petassos, and carries his herald staff, the Kerykeion or Caduceus, often depicted as a staff entwined with two serpents. He's quick-witted, persuasive, and, crucially for this particular errand, one of the very few deities who can travel freely between the world of the living, Mount Olympus, and the depths of the underworld without too much fuss. Hermes, the original multitasking god, delivering top priority messages, guiding newly deceased souls to their final destination, dabbling in a bit of light-hearted trickery, and now add divine hostage negotiator to his already impressive resume. His winged sandals must have racked up some serious frequent flyer miles on the Olympus Underworld Express route. So, Zeus summons Hermes and lays out the mission. The instructions, at least initially, might seem fairly straightforward. Go down to Erebus, my dear Hermes. Have a word with my brother Hades. Use your famous silver tongue and persuade him, for the good of all of us. And to stop Demeter from turning the earth into a permanent popsicle. To allow lovely Persephone to come back up into the light. so her mother might see her and finally relent from her terrible anger. Yet Zeus probably emphasizes the urgency, the dwindling sacrifices, the general inconvenience of a world without plants. Hermes, ever the efficient messenger. A mainstream historical fact is his role as Angelus, the primary go-between for the gods, crucial in resolving countless mythical disputes. Doesn't delay. He straps on his winged sandals, grabs his karakion, and off he zips. You can imagine his journey a swift descent from the bright, though currently barren upper world. Down, 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 through shadowy paths and past gloomy landmarks, until he arrives at the imposing, dark gates of Hades' realm. A quirky tidbit to consider is that Hermes was also known as the Psychopompos, the guide of souls to the underworld. So, while this trip is to fetch a mostly living goddess, he's intimately familiar with the route. The gatekeepers like Quarren and Cerberus, and the general, less than cheerful ambiance of the place. He probably doesn't even need GPS for this run. He arrives at the palace of Hades and finds the Lord of the Dead within, seated on his imposing throne, with Persephone beside him, still looking utterly wretched, probably listless and pale from her long stay in the gloom and her refusal to eat well. Mostly refuse. Hermes, ever the diplomat, delivers Zeus's message with all due formality and persuasiveness. He explains the dire situation on Earth, Demeter's unyielding wrath, the suffering of mortals, and the Olympian consensus that something really needs to be done. You can imagine Persephone's reaction. For the first time since her abduction, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope might ignite within her. A messenger from Olympus. From her father, news from the world above. Could this be her chance to escape this shadowy prison and return to her mother in the sunlight? She probably listens with desperate intensity. Hades, for his part, listens to Hermes' arguments. He's no fool. He knows that when Zeus makes a strong suggestion, backed by the threat of a perpetually barren earth and an enraged Demeter, it's wise to pay attention. He might be king of the underworld, but Zeus is king of everything else, and cosmic harmony and the flow of souls into his realm, which would eventually cease if all mortals died out, is important. He might be reluctant. He might grumble about the injustice of it all, but he can see the bigger picture. However, this is where the instructions get complicated. Just as Hades is perhaps about to reluctantly agree, or as Hermes is making his final, most persuasive point, the issue of that little pomegranate snack comes to light. Hades, with a certain grim satisfaction, or perhaps even a touch of regret if you're feeling charitable towards him, reveals that Persephone has, in fact, partaken of the food of the underworld. Ah, Hermes, my swift-footed nephew. He might say, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. There's just one small, seed-sized complication to your otherwise excellent proposal. It seems my dear queen developed a slight peckishness. And you can just imagine Hermes letting out a divine sigh, his winged cap drooping slightly. Oh, for the love of Tartarus and all its torments. There's always a catch, isn't there? Mythologists continue to analyze the intricate power dynamics at play in this divine negotiation. They debate how much Zeus's final decision, which we'll get to, was influenced by genuine compassion for the suffering of humanity and the grief of his sister Demeter, versus a more pragmatic need to maintain cosmic order and ensure the continued flow of those all-important sacrifices from mortals. Or even if it was, in part, a subtle reassertion of his ultimate authority over his powerful, but still junior, brother Hades. For now, Hermes has delivered the initial message. The possibility of Persephone's return has been broached, but the pomegranate looms large, a tiny crimson obstacle with massive implications. The simple mission of bring her home has just become a far more complex negotiation, one that will require all of Hermes' diplomatic skill and Zeus's ultimate authority to resolve. The fate of Persephone, and indeed the fate of the world's seasons, hangs in the balance, all because of a few tempting seeds. So, Hermes, our divine delivery guy and now rather stressed cosmic negotiator, has just discovered that pomegranate-sized wrench in Zeus's otherwise straightforward bring Persephone home. Please before Mom freezes the planet plan, as we saw in the last section. That little subterranean snack Persephone had has made things exceptionally complicated. It's no longer a simple case of Hades needing to let my daughter go. It's now a full-blown celestial custody battle, with the fate of global agriculture, not to mention Olympian dinner invitations, hanging precariously in the balance. Cue the divine lawyers, or at least some very tense, high-stakes Olympian-level discussions. You can just imagine the atmosphere. Up on Mount Olympus, or perhaps via Hermes zipping back and forth with increasingly frazzled wing flaps. The negotiations are in full swing. Zeus, king of the gods, is trying to mediate, probably rubbing his temples and wishing he'd just stuck to thunderbolts. Demeter, still down on Earth, probably in her disguised Doso form, is unyielding. She wants her daughter back. Full stop. No compromises, or the Earth remains an icy, barren wasteland, and no one gets any more nice sacrificial wheat cakes. Her divine grief has turned into a powerful bargaining chip. Hades, down in his gloomy kingdom, now has a legitimate, if rather sneakily obtained, claim on Persephone due to that ancient law about eating the food of the dead. He wants his queen, but even he can see that a world entirely devoid of living souls to eventually populate his realm isn't great for long-term business. It's a proper divine deadlock. Imagine the Olympian family group chat. Zeus trying to keep things civil. Demeter probably on permanent mute but still radiating icy disapproval and threatening further blizzards. Hades perhaps with a stoic king of the underworld profile picture, steadfastly refusing to budge. Hermes is just desperately trying to make sure his winged sandals don't get singed in the ensuing divine crossfire. Eventually, after much toing and froing, after threats and counter-threats, and perhaps some truly epic celestial sulking from Demeter, a compromise is hammered out, brokered by the ever-patient or increasingly exasperated Zeus. The solution hinges on those fateful pomegranate seeds. The ancient law cannot be entirely ignored. Since Persephone partook of the fruit of the underworld, she is bound to it. However, given the, shall we say, extenuating circumstances of her arrival there, being dramatically kidnapped, and the rather pressing issue of the entire planet being on the verge of becoming a permanent ice cube, a special arrangement is made. The deal is this: Persephone will spend a portion of each year in the underworld with Hades as his queen. The exact duration often varies in different ancient sources. A mainstream historical fact is that common accounts specify she ate 3, 4, or sometimes 6 or 7 seeds, which then corresponded to the number of months she had to remain below. If it was 3 or 4 seeds out of a typical pomegranate's many, it might mean a third of the year. If it was 6, it would be half the year. For the remaining portion of the year, she is free to return to the world above, to live with her mother Demeter, and bring springtime and fertility back to the land. So they essentially reach a divine timeshare agreement for Persephone, but with more profound consequences than arguing over who gets the good holiday weeks. She's to be a part-time queen of the underworld, a commuter between life and death. Now, there's often a little subplot here involving a character named Ascalaphus. A quirky and rather unfortunate tidbit in some versions of the myth is that Ascalaphus, an underworld spirit, or perhaps one of Hades' gardeners, was the one who actually saw Persephone eat the pomegranate seeds and, like a meddling telltale, reported it to Hades, or perhaps even directly to the other gods when they were trying to negotiate her full release. Demeter, in her fury at this inconvenient truth-teller, promptly punished him by turning him into a screech owl, or by burying him under a massive rock. Lesson learned: never be the bearer of news that a powerful, grieving goddess really doesn't want to hear. HR in the underworld, and indeed on Olympus, could be remarkably harsh, with very little in the way of formal grievance procedures. So, how does Persephone herself react to this complex, cosmic custody arrangement? You can imagine her feelings are a whirlwind of emotions. There must be immense relief, a breathtaking, heart-stopping joy at the thought of returning to the sunlight, to the flowers, to her beloved mother. After so long in the oppressive gloom, the promise of escape, even a partial one, must feel like a miracle. But this joy is inevitably tinged with sorrow and perhaps a new kind of dread. She is not entirely free. She must return, year after year, to this shadowy kingdom, to this stern god who is now her husband. Her carefree days as core, the simple maiden, are well and truly over. She is now bound to two worlds, two vastly different existences. Hades, for his part, has to make a concession. He doesn't get to keep his queen with him always, but he doesn't lose her entirely either. He secures her presence for a part of the year, his claim legitimized by those pomegranate seeds. Perhaps he sees it as a victory of sorts, or at least the best deal he was going to get given Demeter's planet-halting tantrum. Demeter, too, must compromise. She gets her daughter back. The light will return to her eyes and to the world, but not for the whole year. She must endure Persephone's annual absence, a yearly reminder of her daughter's connection to the realm of the dead. The precise legalistic or magical basis for this pomegranate-binding rule is a subject of ongoing scholarly discussion. Some see it as an ancient taboo, a deep-seated belief about the profound act of consuming the sustenance of another realm, especially the realm of the departed, thereby creating an unbreakable link. Others interpret its significance more symbolically, tying the pomegranate to concepts of fertility due to its many seeds, the consummation of marriage, however involuntary, or as representing Persephone's inevitable and intrinsic connection to the chthonic, or underworld, aspects of divinity, a destiny she couldn't escape even if she hadn't snacked. Whatever the deep meaning, the deal is struck. Oaths are likely sworn on the inviolable river Styx to ensure all parties adhere to the terms. The fate of Persephone is decided, and with it, the rhythm of the world above. Her casual vacation in the underworld is about to transition into a rather more structured, if still somewhat unconventional, regular commute. She's got her part-time gig, her shared custody arrangement, and the world gets to have seasons again. All thanks to some divine bickering, a very determined mother, and a few pesky pomegranate seeds. So, the cosmic timeshare agreement is signed, sealed, and probably notarized by Hermes himself with his official Karakion staff. As we established in the last section, Persephone now has a rather unique annual schedule, a divine work-life balance that involves commuting between two vastly different realms, part-time goddess of springtime sunshine and frolicking lambs, and part-time queen of all things gloomy, subterranean, and generally deceased. One wonders how she listed that on her Olympian resume. Skills include flower arranging, light reaping seasonal, and co-management of vast, shadowy kingdom. References available from mother slightly overbearing and husband surprisingly accommodating. Considering? But what actually happens during her months downstairs? How does our former flower child adapt to her reign in the land of no sunshine? When Persephone descends each year into Hades' realm, she is no longer just core, the frightened maiden abducted from the meadow. She takes her place, however reluctantly at first, as Persephone, queen of the underworld. Respected consort of Hades? This isn't just an empty title, it carries weight, authority, and a certain undeniable, if somber, majesty. The very air in the underworld might shift subtly with her presence. The whispering shades might fall a little quieter, or perhaps even bow their insubstantial heads as she passes. Her relationship with Hades, the architect of her dramatic life change, likely evolves from those early days of terror and awkward one-sided courtship. Over the recurring cycles of her stay, perhaps a more complex understanding, even a form of companionship, develops. He is, after all, her husband, and this is her other home, her other kingdom. Some interpretations suggest that while it was never a marriage born of romantic love in the mortal sense, a kind of mutual respect or even a quiet, understated affection might have grown between them. He, the solitary ruler, now has a queen who understands his domain, who shares his throne. She, far from her sunny world, might find in his steadfast if gloomy presence a certain predictability and power that is entirely different from the vibrant but sometimes fickle world above. Maybe Persephone did manage to brighten up Hades' palace a tiny bit, in her own way. Darling Hades, have you considered perhaps a slightly less oppressive shade of black? For the main hall, perhaps a very, very dark charcoal gray? And maybe we could get some of those bioluminescent fungi for the West Wing. Just a thought. As queen, Persephone would have her own roles and responsibilities, though these are often less explicitly detailed in the myths than Hades' own. She would certainly sit beside him on her own throne, a figure of regal dignity. Perhaps she receives the newly arrived souls alongside him, her presence offering a different kind of divine face to greet them, one that still carries a memory of sunlight and life, a stark contrast to her husband's inherent gloom. She might have some say in the affairs of his kingdom, her perspective as a former inhabitant of the upper world perhaps influencing certain judgments or decisions. Some scholars suggest that her connection to the Eleusinian mysteries, which promised initiates a better afterlife, might imply that she played a role in ensuring fairness or offering some form of comfort or guidance to certain deserving shades, particularly those, perhaps, who had been initiated into her rites. Her demeanor and appearance during her underworld reign would also transform. The carefree, laughing maiden is now a queen, and her bearing would reflect that. She might still be sorrowful for her lost freedom, but a certain regal composure, a quiet authority, would settle upon her. The flower she was once associated with might give way to, or be complemented by, symbols more fitting to her chthonic realm, the dark, glossy leaves and blood-red seeds of the pomegranate she once tasted, or perhaps the opium poppy, associated with sleep and eternal rest, or the pale, ghostly asphodel that carpets the fields of the dead. She becomes a figure of both beauty and a certain dread. In ancient Greek art and religious practice, this duality is a mainstream historical fact. Persephone was revered both as Kore, the vibrant maiden of spring and grain, often depicted with her mother Demeter, holding sheaves of wheat or flowers, and as Persephone, the formidable queen of the underworld, a chthonic deity embodying the inevitable cycle of life, death, and eventual rebirth. This quiet influence as queen is fascinating. She might not be actively trying to overthrow Hades' established order or install cheerful floral wallpaper throughout the palace, but her very presence, her unique nature as a being of both light and shadow, could introduce subtle shifts. Perhaps she brings a touch of mercy to the stern justice of the underworld, or a different kind of wisdom born from her understanding of both life and death. She wields a certain power. As queen, she commands respect from all the denizens of the underworld, from the lowliest shade to the most ancient chthonic spirits. Even great heroes who later venture into Hades' realm, like Heracles or Orpheus, often find it prudent to seek her favor or acknowledge her authority. Indeed, a quirky tidbit highlighting her formidable status is found in some of the specific epithets, or descriptive titles, used for Persephone in her role as queen of the underworld. While Kore means simply maiden, her underworld titles were far more imposing names like Despoina the Mistress, a title of great power, Epaine the Dreadful or the Awesome One, or Praxidike Exactor of Justice. These are not the names of a wilting flower. These are the titles of a powerful goddess who commands a realm and its inhabitants. She went from innocent maiden primarily concerned with optimal daisy-picking conditions to dread queen who can command legions of the unhappily deceased and probably has an opinion on the underworld's tax code. That's quite the character arc. Talk about a glow-up, or perhaps in her particular case, a rather significant and impressive gloom-up. The nature and extent of Persephone's actual power and agency as queen of the underworld is, naturally, a frequent topic of discussion and debate among scholars. Some interpretations view her as remaining largely a passive consort to Hades, her role primarily defined by her marriage and her tragic abduction. Others, however, argue that she developed into a significant and independent chthonic deity in her own right, wielding her own distinct authority, commanding her own cults, and embodying profound truths about the interconnectedness of life and death, growth and decay. So, as you picture Persephone on her dark throne during her annual stint downstairs, remember that she is no longer merely the abducted girl. She is a queen, a complex figure who has navigated an unimaginable transition. She has found a way to exist, and perhaps even to rule in a realm antithetical to her original nature. Her casual vacation has become a significant part of her divine identity, shaping her into a figure of immense power, sorrow, and a unique dual wisdom that bridges two worlds. So, Persephone has been diligently, if perhaps a little mournfully, fulfilling her queenly duties in the underworld, maybe even finding a grudging respect for the order of Hades' domain, or perhaps just getting really good at ignoring the endless, gentle moaning of the shades, as we imagined in the last section. But her employment contract with the Lord of the Dead, brokered by Zeus and heavily influenced by that fateful pomegranate clause, remember that deceptively innocent little snack, clearly stipulated part-time basis only. And now, after months spent in the dim, eternal twilight of the subterranean realms, after countless silent dinners with her gloomy husband, the cosmic alarm clock finally goes off. It's time for her annual up-top trip, her parole from the Palace of Gloom, her much-anticipated return to the world of sunlight, warmth, and, most importantly, her mother. You can imagine a shift in the usually static atmosphere of the underworld. Perhaps Hermes, with his winged sandals and ever-efficient messenger service, arrives once more, this time with a more cheerful directive from Zeus. Okay, Hades, old chap, time's up for this particular shift. Send the queen upstairs as per our agreement, before Demeter decides to invent a new ice age out of sheer impatience. Hades, bound by the divine accord, must let her go. His farewell might be typically stoic, perhaps a gruff reminder of when she's due back. But maybe, just maybe, there's a flicker of something else in his shadowy eyes, reluctance, or even a kind of quiet sorrow at her impending departure. He probably offers her a packed lunch for the journey. Some lovely compressed gloom cakes, my dear, and a refreshing flask of chilled Styx water for the road. No, well, suit yourself. Don't forget your return ticket. For Persephone, this moment must be like a dream. The thought of feeling the sun on her skin again, of breathing air that doesn't smell faintly of ancient dust and regret, of seeing actual living colors instead of endless shades of gray and black, it must fill her with an almost unbearable joy and anticipation. She might be escorted upwards by Hermes, that expert interworld traveler, or perhaps Hades himself. In a final, formal gesture, conveys her in his dark chariot back to the threshold of the living world, to that same chasm, or another like it, from which she first descended. As she steps out of the darkness and into the light, it's like being reborn. And waiting for her, pacing anxiously, her divine heart heavy with months of sorrow and longing, is Demeter. Demeter, who has essentially been hitting refresh on the Is My Daughter Persephone back yet. Webpage of the cosmos for what feels like an eternity, is probably beside herself. The reunion is everything you'd imagine: tears of joy, tight embraces, a mother's overwhelming relief at holding her beloved child once more. Persephone, though changed by her experiences, though now queen of an entire other realm, is still her core, her maiden. Returned from the shadows. There's probably a lot of divine happy crying, enough to water a few of those parched fields, and an immediate global surge in optimistic flower production. As Persephone sets foot back onto the parched, barren earth, a miraculous transformation begins. It's as if the planet itself breathes a collective sigh of relief and shouts, finally, no more of Demeter's icy death stare. Let's get this spring party started. Where Demeter's grief had brought winter and famine, her joy at Persephone's return now unleashes a torrent of life. The snows melt, the frozen ground thaws, and a vibrant green blush spreads across the land. Tender shoots push their way through the soil. Buds on trees swell and burst into leaf. And flowers, oh, the flowers explode in a riot of color, carpeting meadows that were, just moments before, brown and lifeless. Birds begin to sing their most cheerful tunes. Bees hum busily, and the air fills with the sweet scent of blossoms and damp. Fertile earth, rivers, once choked with ice, flow freely again. This, of course, is the very heart of the myth as an explanation for the changing seasons. A mainstream historical fact is that Persephone's annual return to the upper world, and the subsequent reawakening of nature, was the ancient Greeks' powerful etiological story for the arrival of spring and the fertile summer months. Her time spent in the underworld corresponded to the barrenness of winter, or in some hotter Mediterranean climates, the dry, infertile summer. During her months in the world above, Persephone resumes her role alongside her mother. She is once again the maiden of spring, her presence bringing joy, light, and abundance. She wanders the meadows, perhaps with a newfound appreciation for their beauty, her laughter once again echoing through the sunlit groves. Life is good, the world is vibrant, but always in the back of her mind, and in Demeter's, is the knowledge that this joyful reunion is temporary. The terms of the agreement are binding. When her allotted time is up, she must return to the underworld, to her shadowy throne beside Hades. A quirky and rather lovely tidbit is that in many ancient Greek communities, particularly agricultural ones, this joy at Persephone's return and the Earth's reawakening was often celebrated with specific rituals, festivals, or women's rites, such as the Thesmophoria, which was more broadly for Demeter and Persephone, focusing on fertility. These might involve symbolic acts like the ritual planting of the first seeds, processions carrying flowers and torches to welcome the goddess of spring, or offerings made to ensure the continued fertility she brought with her. These celebrations underscored the deep connection between the myth and the agricultural realities of ancient life. The exact timing and duration of Persephone's stay in the underworld versus her time in the upper world, whether it was 1/3 of the year below and 2/3 above, or an even split, as described in the various ancient sources and local traditions, is still a topic of analysis for scholars. These variations might reflect regional differences in climate and agricultural cycles, or perhaps differing theological interpretations of the myth and the relative importance given to Persephone's chthonic versus her spring goddess aspects. But for now, as you picture her reunited with Demeter, walking through fields bursting with new life, the world rejoices. The global freeze is over. The divine part-time queen is on her up-top rotation, and everything is blooming. It's a period of light, growth, and happiness, a vibrant interlude before the inevitable. Cyclical return to the shadows, a pattern that will define her existence, and the rhythm of the world for all time to come. So, Persephone has enjoyed her up-top trip, her glorious sun-drenched furlough from the underworld, bringing flowers, warmth, and boundless joy back to a grateful world and, more importantly, to her ecstatic mother. Demeter. As we saw in the last section, the meadows have bloomed, the grain has ripened, and life has been good. But all timeshare agreements, even divine ones brokered by Zeus himself, have their terms and their checkout times. The months of light and laughter, of weaving garlands with nymphs and sharing stories with Demeter, must inevitably draw to a close. The cosmic calendar, dictated by those fateful pomegranate seeds, turns once more. You can imagine a bittersweet quality to these final days above ground. Persephone knows she must return to Hades, to her shadowy throne and her role as queen of the underworld. Demeter knows she must once again let her daughter go. Their farewells are likely tinged with sorrow, though now perhaps with a thread of acceptance, an understanding of the established cycle. Persephone probably has her underworld luggage, such as it is, permanently packed and ready by the door. Right then. Mother, it's that time of year again. Got my pomegranates for the journey? My favorite warm shawl made of midnight mist. My official queen of the eternally gloomy but well-administered sash. I'll send a raven when I arrive. Try not to freeze everything too dramatically this time. All right, just a light frost will do. And as Persephone descends once more into the waiting chariot of Hades, or perhaps is dutifully escorted by Hermes back to the gates of Erebus, Demeter's heart aches anew. Her grief, though now familiar, still has the power to chill the world. As her daughter disappears from sight, the goddess of the harvest once again withdraws her life-giving powers from the earth. The vibrant greens of summer begin to fade to the russets and golds of autumn. The leaves fall from the trees. The air grows colder, and the land prepares for the barren sleep of winter. The birds fly south, the fields lie fallow, and a hush falls over nature. This, you see, is the very essence of how the ancient Greeks understood the changing of their world. This entire dramatic saga, Persephone's abduction, Demeter's sorrowful search, the global freeze, the divine negotiations, and the resulting part-time queen arrangement, is a powerful ideological myth. That's a mainstream historical fact, It's a story created to explain the origins of a natural phenomenon. In this case, the cycle of the seasons. When Persephone is with her mother Demeter in the world above, the earth rejoices, and we have spring and summer, periods of growth, warmth, and abundance. But when the time comes for Persephone to fulfill her duties as queen of the underworld, and she returns to Hades, Demeter mourns, and the earth becomes barren, bringing autumn and winter, the seasons of dormancy and cold. So, if your ancient Greek olive harvest failed, or your barley crop was a bit meager, you didn't just blame poor soil conditions or a lack of timely rain. Nope. Clearly. Persephone had just clocked in for her extended winter shift downstairs, and Demeter was having another one of her entirely understandable, if my daughter's not happy, nobody's happy, and that includes you at planet Earth moments. It's much more dramatic and certainly more divinely orchestrated than just axial tilt. The symbolism within this myth is incredibly rich. Persephone herself is often seen as embodying the grain seed. Like a seed, she is buried in the dark earth, the underworld, for a period, seemingly dead or dormant during the winter months. But then, with the coming of spring, she rises again, breaking forth into the light, bringing new life and growth with her. Her annual journey mirrors the agricultural cycle that was so fundamental to ancient Greek life, a constant rhythm of death, burial, and miraculous rebirth. The myth also speaks to the profound power of love and grief. Demeter's love for her daughter is so immense it can literally change the world, and her grief so powerful it can halt life itself. This cyclical journey of descent and return, of loss and reunion, was also at the very heart of the Eleusinian mysteries, those ancient and highly secretive religious rites dedicated to Demeter and Persephone that we've touched upon. Initiates into the mysteries, by participating in rituals that likely reenacted or symbolized Persephone's story, were offered a deeper understanding of the great themes of life, death, and the hope of a blessed afterlife, identifying their own spiritual journey with that of the goddess who traveled through darkness and returned to the light. A quirky or fringe tidbit related to this cyclical understanding is that there were certain days or periods in the ancient Greek calendar, varying by local tradition, that were considered unlucky or inauspicious for specific activities like planting new crops, getting married, or starting important ventures. These times were often believed to coincide with Persephone's descent into the underworld, or when Demeter's grief was thought to be at its most potent, making the world less receptive to new beginnings or joyful celebrations. So, you'd check your divine calendar carefully before planning any major life events. Anthropologists and scholars of religion continue to debate the precise origins and deepest layers of the Persephone myth. They explore potential connections to even earlier Near Eastern myths of dying and rising gods or vegetation goddesses, or ancient agricultural deities whose stories also embodied the cycles of nature. And they ponder how these widespread ancient themes might have been synthesized and transformed within the unique cultural and religious landscape of ancient Greece. But, whatever its deepest roots, the story of Persephone's casual vacation that turned into a cosmic commute, her unexpected journey from carefree flower child to the formidable and dual-natured queen of both the underworld and the returning spring, resonated profoundly with the ancient Greeks. It gave them a narrative, a divine drama, to make sense of one of the most fundamental and inescapable realities of their existence, the ever-turning wheel of the seasons. The constant interplay of life and death, sorrow and joy, darkness and light. Her annual trip wasn't just a divine timeshare, it was the very rhythm of their world. This whole story is basically the ancient Greek way of saying, yes, winter can be a bit of a downer, and the fields look terribly sad. But don't worry, the goddess of springtime has a return ticket, and she's very good about her schedule. Mostly. It's cosmic job sharing, really, ensuring the universe keeps ticking along. And now, as we reflect on this ancient explanation for the world's turning, let the image of Persephone, the eternal commuter between two starkly different realms, begin to gently fade. Her story, which started with a simple sunlit meadow and a single enticing flower, has taken us through the depths of the earth and back again, shaping not only her own destiny but the very pattern of life on the world above. The echoes of Demeter's sorrow and her subsequent joy, the rumble of Hades' chariot, the rustling of asphodel in the underworld's quiet fields. All these can now soften, becoming distant and peaceful. You've journeyed with Persephone through her initial, innocent days, her sudden and shocking descent, her bewilderment in the shadowy kingdom of Hades, the awkward attempts at courtship, the fateful bite of the pomegranate, the divine negotiations, her growth into a powerful queen, and her joyous, life-giving return. Her casual vacation turned out to be anything but, evolving into a profound and essential role in the cosmic order, a story that gave meaning to the changing face of the earth. As these ancient figures and their timeless drama recede from your thoughts, allow yourself to feel the quiet comfort of your own surroundings, the gentle stillness of your own night. There are no more meadows to explore tonight, no more shadowy realms to navigate. The cycle of this particular story is complete. Let the peace of this ending settle over you, like the softest blanket, and may your own journey into sleep be swift, easy, and filled with the most pleasant of dreams.